Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and as you all know, I love talking to all the different voices and all the different expressions within the restoration. Some people are in it, some people are out of it, some people were in it and now are out of it. But I think it's really important to hear all these different discussions and different voices. And one of those really important voices in this space is Heidi Luv of the Unfiltered Rise podcast. How you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And I guess I'm out of it. I like that term. Haha.
So yes, you would describe yourself as out of it or as Exmo. And
Yes.
of course, we part of our connection is through a well-known Exmo Joe, who has the Church of Korhor YouTube
Yes.
channel. And he brought us together, and he thought that you would make as an interesting guest here on Mormon Book Reviews. And we'd like to talk about history and things like that. And just earlier last year, actually, I had Jim Bennett on my program, who's
Oh,
the
awesome.
son of U.S. Senator Bob Bennett, who was the right-hand man of Howard Hughes for a long period of time. As a matter of fact, if you, I'll make sure I'll leave a link in that to that episode in the description so you can check it out. But basically, he actually swam in Howard Hughes's pool as a child,
Oh,
and so
wow.
but Bob Bennett never actually met Howard Hughes. But what's so fascinating about the story of Howard Hughes is, first of all, the story of Las Vegas, the story of the mob, the story of the fact that the only people that Howard Hughes essentially trusted were Latter-day Saints, and he
Yes.
surrounded himself by these people. So it's a very fascinating story. It's kind of an undertold story. Again, we talked with Jim Bennett about it, but Heidi has some really interesting insights into this whole very fascinating story as well. And so I asked her to come on the program today to discuss that. So before we get started, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, Heidi.
Absolutely. I am, as you stated, at Exmo. I am out, but I do live in Utah and we have six kids. And actually two grandchildren. So we're just trucking along on that Mormon path, anyways, like you said, right? You still are somewhat Mormon. Ha ha. So, I live here and it is a little bit weird to live here as an ex-Mormon, but our kids are here and they're settled and we just don't want to miss grandkids growing up. We have them every week. So, we'll stay. It's worth it. I love the mountains, honestly. And the Latter-day Saint people are really kind people. A
Hmm.
lot of stuff that I talk about is a high level, right? This is like top level stuff or things that the typical person going to church on Sunday, they don't know. They don't know this stuff. So I don't hold them like accountable either for not knowing. We all have to go our own path. So I am still a Christian. I love Exmo, but I do believe in some Jesus. So I love Jesus.
Well, just I haven't asked you this off camera, but is there a local church that you attend, or are you involved in any church, or are you just kind of doing your own thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the scripture that says nothing about going to church, right, but becoming the church. You should become the church. And so that's a big part for me, especially being in Utah. Fool me once. Ha ha ha. Right. But I do believe in all the regular canons and the regular King James Bible. And I mean, I use extra canonical books for study, but yeah, just the mainstream pretty much on that. So,
Okay, so you describe
yeah.
yourself as like basically now a mainstream Christian, so you're still a believer, but
Yes,
you have some
non-denominational Christian. Yep. Yep.
non-denominational Christian. Okay, great. Great for you to establish that. And again, folks, this is not an anti-Mormon program. This is a program where we talk to all the different voices. So I've had some very, very faithful Latter-day Saints on, and also some ones that have are some of the chief critics of the church. But this is a neutral, safe space for all the different voices, and I'm really proud of the legacy that we've been able to establish here at MBR. So Heidi, before was there anything you wanted to you kind of actually put together a bit of a slide presentation.
It did.
So
Yeah.
uh, uh, I guess before we do start on that, I just want to say, is there anything like a preface that you would like to talk about? Because again, we're going to talk about Howard Hughes, the mob, and Latter-day Saints, and what a fascinating story. And as a matter of fact, I did talk to another person last year about their work that they've done on the Mafia and Latter-day Saints as well. Apparently, there's stories going around that there were stake centers that were paid for with mob money and stuff like that. Um, Maybe talk a little bit about what got you interested in this subject in the first place.
Boy, oh boy, I fell down the rabbit hole. I'll tell you what, Howard Hughes is fascinating in general, just a fascinating person. And when I heard about the Mormon Mafia, I thought,
Well,
is
it
that
makes
real?
before
Yeah.
we get started actually, because a lot of our younger audience they don't know who Howard Hughes is even.
We're gonna actually on the slideshow, I'm gonna let everybody know a
Great. So
lot
we'll get some
about
background
Howard.
on Howard Hughes. Now, some of them might know it from the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, but many people's and even that movie's been out for a long time. So a lot of people don't know
Right.
who this person was. He was at the time was the richest man in the world. He was kind of the Elon Musk of his time. So
Actually, his IQ was 9 points higher than Elon's, so you're exactly correct.
yes.
He is very, very smart, and we'll get into everything about Howard because I think it's a fascinating background story, and I do slides a lot with my presentations because a picture's worth a thousand words, and especially when I'm doing controversial stuff, I don't want if a Mormon were to watch the show, I want them to see that this is real, that Heidi's not jilted by the church and she wants to make up some things because I'm
Okay.
really not. Yeah, it's
You just
just
want to
my
stick with
own
facts.
thing. Yeah, yeah, that's
Great.
just for me. Yeah,
So you
exactly.
said something Mormon Mafia. What is this? What are you
The
talking about?
Mormon Mafia. So let's do this slideshow. And this goes a lot further than I could ever really believe. I started down this because I do a show called Monthly Mormon Mondays with my friend, Paranoid American, and it just started off because he is a Mason and he wanted to know all about the Mormon Church, and I'm like, I guess, like the I guess so. Well, like you've had me on, you've seen the background. He's like, no, 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 I want to ask you certain things. So we started doing this, and it became really funny. In fact, one of the painful things he made me do is watch Saturday's Warrior and explain all that to him. And I was like, oh no, flashbacks of my childhood, right? Oh my gosh. So we got into this one day, and I was like, I don't even know about this, to be honest. So when I learn things, I'm like a dog with a bone. I love to connect dots. I am conspiratorial in nature. Just I think it's just part of critical thinking. I think as a nurse, I just have always been like, let me see what else, follow the money, follow this, follow that, follow the power. And so I got really involved in this one, and it's probably going to be for me, probably four presentations in. I've got this one and a backup one coming, and I'm sure there'll be more. So, but we have to start somewhere, right? And a lot of people don't know about Vegas, and Vegas was actually settled by the Mormons, and a lot of people don't know this. It was a midpoint between California and getting to back east. So they sent out prophets and missionaries and everything there to kind of start this up. And the missionaries stayed and they settled the area. But quickly they found within 2 years it wasn't the best, right? So 1855 to 1857, we have the Mormons trying to settle this region. They did settle some areas that are still going to this day, like Bunkerville and little outskirts, but it's extremely hot and barren and very deserty. And so they weren't able to stay there with crops and whatnot. So they did abandon this, but this is still in existence, this replica. So it's out north off the strip. People can go see this if they want to go see this.
What
It's
is that?
kind of
What is
fun.
that building?
This is a fort from the Mormons.
So
And so it
okay.
still exists. Yeah, it's kind of fun. You can go look at it, you can go tour it, and the Mormon church is over that. So kind of fun to see settlements and settlers, especially for me. I'm from Taylor's, Morgan's, literally in my DNA. It's like Mormon pioneer. So
Okay.
I like to learn because it's my family, I mean,
And
why not?
And
So I,
I just real quick, Heidi, I just want to point out that I know we're using the term Mormon. This is a very common
oh,
term, but I know a lot of people prefer for it to be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Don't be offended. This is just an overall history, but because Mormons have essentially been referred to as Mormons for most of their history, and so that's part of the story. But we do want to honor the name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I know that's the preference of the brethren, and so.
yes, absolutely. And I do Mormons a lot because this is all history and past. And so the slides and different things are all calling them Mormons. And so that was before the changeover. So that's kind of why. And then this is a picture, really rare picture of Howard Hughes and his mother.
Oh,
And And to understand this whole thing, we have to really understand the background of Howard Hughes because you can't fully understand anyone without knowing their history. I say the same thing of Joseph Smith or anybody that I break down because it all goes into who you become, right? So he is a son of an ex-oiled wildcatter, is how they described. And this mom here was described as a Dallas debutante. So the funny thing is about his mom is she had OCD as well.
Okay.
And we're going to find this passing on to her son. And she was very insistent that she check him. Polio was rampant when he was little. And so she would check his toes, his teeth, his fingernail, like everything. She was super paranoid. It was her only child. She basically instilled if he didn't have OCD, she probably gave it to him. And they were extremely enmeshed to the point where his mother actually wanted him sleeping with her into his teenage years.
Mm.
So this got a little awkward, and it's never a good idea. Co-sleeping's fine up to a certain age, but they've proven that this can be a problem, like with Ed Gein and different people later in life, if you continue these kinds of behaviors. And unfortunately, she did. But Howard was born with, an ear problem that made him deaf. And a lot of people don't know that, called otosclerosis. And he also had the OCD, as we spoke about. And we're going to talk about some things that happened to him later. So he legitimately had some problems. And, she was just worried. She was a worried mom. I don't know if that was nefarious or not, but definitely led to some weird places. This is also a photo of Howard Hughes as a teenager. I just think it's fun to show a little bit of progression here because, I mean, you have to, like I said, know a little bit about what happened here. So this is him as a child and where he lived. And something terrible happens to Howard about 19 years of age. His parents both die, and they die of separate reasons. His father has a heart attack, and his mom dies in ectopic pregnancy complications. So this leads him to further go into healthcare and health donations and everything later in life. And so it's really important to understand, well, why does he even start that? Why is that important to him? He also inherits his father's Howard Tools Company at this time, and it's worth a lot of money. And so Howard has this money, and he's like, what can a young man do, right? What can we do? Well, what can't we do? Back then, he kind of had the world at his fingertips with money. So he was an aerospace engineer. He was a businessman, a film producer, investor, philanthropist, and aircraft pilot. So the first thing he does with his money is he contacts his uncle and he goes to Hollywood and he tries to be this film producer, which he does semi-successfully. However, his OCD is so severe that it takes so long for these films to go out, for him to let go of cuts. He was driving like people wild, just trying to make them be perfect too. And it just wasn't a good situation for him. He also drove away most of the women in his life. This is a picture of one of his wives and him. And kind of was known to drive them a little bit crazy. And so that also becomes pretty important here soon because he's going to meet some people to help him with that. But he was known as a lady killer, and it does lead to him becoming infected with syphilis. And there was no penicillin back then. So it did go to neurosyphilis, which obviously affects the mind. So
Mm.
whether or not he had OCD, we don't know, but it obviously is getting worse and worse and worse over the years. Also, he loved to be a pilot, and we'll come back to explain what this is here in a second. He loved to be a pilot. He was related to the Wright brothers. And so they were his distant cousins, and he had a bad plane accident and actually had a severe TBI from this. So all of these things play into what's going to happen to Howard, like what I showed in that last
What's a
picture. I got it.
TBI? What's that?
Oh, sorry. A total brain injury. So he
Okay.
has some issues with his brain in general, and he starts getting really paranoid, okay? And so he's going to start surrounding himself, like you said, with kind of a security agency. He's going to start asking also for certain things like his wives to be followed and whatnot, but I'll explain. Of course, you hate to say anybody deserves to be cheated on. I'm not saying that, but I will say this. Howard would only see his wife for 20 minutes a day. They didn't sleep together, they didn't spend time together. And all he would do is have her come in and look at her because he was so weird about his OCD. And so he got so weird about his OCD with her that he actually hired someone called Mayhew, and we're going to get into that. But this man that was a movie star, that was this philanthropist, pilot, all these awesome things, billionaire extraordinaire, dies like this, and we're going to talk about why here soon. And he ends up being so paranoid he literally becomes a recluse. And so it's kind of sad, to know what's going to progress here with his mental illness from whatever reason he had that. So he's starting to travel about, and he ends up at the Desert Inn. All right. And when he first gets to Las Vegas, he was there in a place called the 5 room cottage near the Desert Inn called the Greenhouse. He lived there 1 year, and he ordered it to never be changed, but he never went back to it. This is the kind of stuff he does. And he
Mhm.
liked it so much that he kept coming back. But eventually he ends up at the Desert Inn, and he's there visiting, and he's got the top floors, and they were kind of complaining about him because he was getting really strange. He was blacking out windows. He was reclusing up there. Sometimes he would go streaking. He was often found roaming around naked, and they were like, "This is just too much. We can't have you do this like in our hotel, right? This is a hotel." And so he said, "That's okay. You can get out. I'm gonna buy it." And so he does. And this occurs in 1966 because he wouldn't come out of his room. It was all blacked out, and he had the top 2 floors. He just stayed in there all the time. And when you do that, you have to have people continue your businesses, right? He was
Mhm.
this rich guy. But also to buy the Desert Inn or any other casino in operation at this time, he should have had to be photographed. He should have had to be fingerprinted. All of these things Howard Hughes didn't have to do. So I guess if you have enough money, you can continue living life like this, have people wait on you, and not do the things that other people do. So he got so paranoid that he actually had a whole routine for all of his nurses to even turn doorknobs. Like they had to have 5 tissues. Like it's all laid out. It's laid out because they did a post-death psychological evaluation on him, and that included like talking to all his family members or people that had been around him, or like, anyone that was close and near him, which was not very many people, and that knew history of him. So he ended up putting Kleenex boxes on his feet. This is from the movie that you spoke about. This isn't really him. He quit cutting his fingernails. He quit cutting his hair. I mean, he just got really strange. And so he also would buy random radio and film things because he wanted to watch certain films over and over and over again. So he would buy the company and ended up, owning quite a few of those. So this is another picture of kind of what was going on here. He was not compensating well. We'll just say that. So in 1970, he was whisked out of this whole situation, and we'll get into his group here in a second, but I just want to give a conclusion of what happened to Howard because it's going to kind of go away in a minute, by somebody named James O. Golden. And he was taken to the Xanadu Hotel on Thanksgiving evening, and he was whisked out literally on a stretcher. He remained there for the most, well, he died in 1976, so this was 1970. And he remained there until he was on a flight, supposedly to go to another hotel. And then he passed away on this flight. Well, when they got his body, this is where it gets conspiratorial, right? He died full of bed sores. He weighed 90 pounds. This guy's 6'3".
Mhm.
Okay. But that's not the biggest deal. He's got all of these broken off needles in his body. Okay. Now, Howard got really addicted to opiates, and that was not hidden, really. Everybody knew this. But you don't break off needles. And especially back then, the needles that they had are pretty crazy looking. I mean, they were big and they were thick and they were made of actual metal.
Right.
And they were broken off in his body. To me, that talks a very big story of possibly being held against his will.
Yeah.
Um, maybe one needle broken, I could see it, but honestly, I take care of a lot of people. I do drug rehabilitation now. I'm mental health services nurse, and they're pretty good at it. It only takes a little while to get very good at what you're doing. And Howard wasn't that. He also was surrounded around the clock by nurses. So I find it pretty interesting that he had some of this going on at his death. It
Hmm.
was also really conspiratorial about like how quickly they buried him and different things. He wanted to be cryogenically frozen. And I'm not sure why that didn't happen because he did obtain the coffin for that.
Huh.
So I don't know why they didn't do that and go forth with his wishes, but I do want to mention the Xanadu Hotel is going to come up in an international ring of kind of espionage plus hotel lines combined together. Not in this presentation, probably in the next, but it's pretty important and involves the Mormons and including James O. Golden, who was a Mormon, who was the one that got him out of there and was
Okay, so
not
just
part
to
of
be
the
clear, so
core.
he was how long was Howard at the Xanadu? How long was he staying there?
He was there for 6 years approximately.
Okay, so that was
So,
okay, interesting. But
yeah,
that's I wait, what country is that in?
in the Bahamas.
Okay.
And
And just
so
so just from my
I think
understanding, Howard
Bahamas.
couldn't come back to America because he allegedly, I guess from my understanding, flew out to England and basically contacted the State Department saying that he didn't have a passport and that he was going to be landing and like, well, no, you can't do that. He just basically thought he could do anything he wanted. So basically they said you can land there, but if you don't go and get a passport at the embassy, then you'll never be able to fly back to America again. So that's why I ended up in
Right.
the Bahamas. So,
Yes, and well, and that's the story, right? Like we know there was a lot of back and forth between Mayhew and the Mormon Mafia at this point. We also know about Watergate that's coming up around this time frame. We know there's a lot of things that Howard Hughes was absolutely involved in, including the Bay of Pigs, and we're going to talk about a lot of this.
right.
And it gets strange, but also I think he was protecting himself in some form or fashion. A lot of people speculate he died far before he really did. And so I mean, I don't know. There's a book, and it's a close associate of his with the last name Meyer, Meier. And he has a book about this, and he talks about seeing him frozen. And so he doesn't know if they buried somebody else that looked like him. I mean, if they replaced it, he doesn't know. But this guy was also in the Secret Service. So it's kind of interesting to hear these things after the fact, but what we know is also just what they say and the rest is all a mystery. Whoa, that went wild. Okay, it's gonna keep going. I guess it wanted to go through the whole thing. I don't know what happened there. So it's important to understand what happened to Howard and why he was involved in the things he was involved with. This is a picture of James O. Golden, who was the one that helped get him out and fly him out on Thanksgiving. He was in the CIA. They all are. So he was a Secret Service special agent. He also, funny enough, was right next to Richard Nixon as security detail. So, all of this is very interesting with some of these ties that these people have.
And you say
And they,
he was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, correct? Okay.
James O. Golden,
Okay.
yes.
Very good.
Not everyone was. Not everyone was. And also, these people that we're going to talk about here soon is Mayhew, and he was the one that helped Howard get involved with buying some of these casinos and stuff because we know one thing, right? The mob was in charge.
Yep.
The mob was in charge at this time. Sam Giancana was a big player in this, and he was part of the connects that we have for Mayhew and how did Mayhew come involved to this guy that doesn't want to talk to anybody or see anybody or have anything to do with anybody. And actually Mayhew is not a Mormon. He was the contact with Sam. He also was a very big player in the CIA agency, and he kind of posed as a mob made person, and that's how he hooked them up so that he could become an owner of these multiple casinos. And so that's kind of how he got his foot in the door with the mob. Also, Mayhew got him some contracts, not only with his aerospace helicopters. We know that they had a contract, and possibly that went on for a long period of time after. I'm pretty sure it did under his successor on some of this stuff, but they would do the helicopters with the CIA or three-letter agencies, whichever you want to say. And then this actual project, Azorion, is declassified, and people can look this up. He was very involved in this, and it was, for underwater drilling, plus to get out this ship that was down under that was supposedly Russian and communistic. They were trying to get it out.
Yeah,
And
this
so
was
there's
a
kind of
they were making like
this
into
is
an expedition, but it turns out it was a CIA operation to basically extract this submarine so that they could study it because it was like had the latest technology and stuff that the
yes.
Soviets had.
Absolutely right there. Yep. So it was the only one that had the claws to bring up the submarine, and it was hiding inside the ship. And they kind of they glossed over this, right? And this was hidden for a long time, and now it's declassified. But very interesting that, he was involved in these different things. Like, okay, that's weird. Why would you have that happen? Well, the why always ends up back to one player, not just one, but many. This is Mayhew. And he was not a Mormon, like I said. He was a chief executive of Nevada operations for Howard Hughes. Now, he started in 1955 for Howard Hughes, and he was hired to investigate this wife of his because he was convinced she was cheating. And remember, he didn't spend hardly any time with her or anything. And so Mayhew is brought on the scene for this. Well, Mayhew at this time had started his own investigative offices or whatnot, and so he's there, and he does this little operation for Howard Hughes, and then he ends up as part of a trusted person for Hughes and ends up in a lot of other things. To understand about Mayhew, he has a huge history as a former spy, and he has delivered lots of politicians to the three-letter agencies. He worked with Nixon in 1954 against Onassis and the King of Saudi Arabia. He was CIA, not official, but associate. And like I said, his life was basis for Mission Impossible. This is
Hmm.
who that whole show is after. And so it's kind of wild that, he gets skipped over quite often. He was part of the Mormon, quote, Mormon Mafia, which is just the people that Howard Hughes was surrounding himself with. And then he also was mob connected with Johnny Roselli and then also Giancana. He was an advocate for them. And he also was trying to have Castro eliminated. So he was a part of the hit on Castro, and we'll explain how and why. He was the dirty secret guy, actually. He has many Watergate ties to the JFK assassination, ties to Bush, and we'll talk about how today a little bit, and NWO ties, so New World Order. He was the reason Hughes, like I said, was introduced to those mobsters that we talked about and helped with all the introductions to obtain the casinos. So he also orchestrated many plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, and Vice President Nixon was a part of Zapata Offshore Oil Company. We're going to talk about that in a moment. That's a really important connection. And so they leased an island from Howard Hughes with Zapata Oil Company to use as a base for the CIA raids on Cuba. And that was mostly due to Mayhew's introductions with these people. So it's really important to understand how much of a hand Mayhew had in these things. And even it's quoted in multiple books saying that Nixon shook Mayhew's hand, and multiple people overheard on the Onassis issue and said, if you have to kill the bastard, don't do it on American soil. And so a lot of people think he's actually the one that killed Onassis or had it done. And so it's a very interesting situation where we're talking about Mayhew, and this is younger pictures of the Summa board. Summa Corporation was a shell company,
Well, just
and
real
it
quick,
was
who's Onassis? When I think of Onassis, I think of the person that um, Jacqueline.
married.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is that? Oh, okay. They had assassinated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so very interesting where she's connected as well to that. That's kind of a strange, situation, but I mean, we can't pull it apart. Like all the players are gone now. So this connects to bigger ties overall to Watergate, to RFK's assassination, a whole bunch of things. So, but at this point, SummaCorp is just a shell corporation for all of Howard Hughes's corporations. He owned many corporations and he didn't like paying taxes. He was avidly weird against taxes. He was just like anti all of that. And so he just wanted something where he could put everything and kind of hide that. And so that's what this was. And he had a board, but this is funny. The people on the board were some of these people, but not him. He was not on his own board. This puts him in a very not amazing place for his own health and well-being. I do think that possibly this could have been part of the downfall of Howard Hughes and the loss of control of him. So Howard Hughes even had all of these companies made underneath him by some of these players on the corporation, and he didn't even know. He wouldn't even know what was going on. So these are the trustees.
Hmm.
One is a secretary, one is a lawyer, one is Frank William Gay, who is extremely important Mormon, part of the Mormon Mafia. George W. Thorne, he was the doctor. So all of these things are very curious when you put them together, right? You've got doctor, lawyer, your right hand man. I mean, but you're not on the board. Oh, and your secretary. Yeah. So it gets a little weird. So here's their old icon for the Summa Corporation, which has been changed into many things and actually sort of exists still to this day in a different way. Prescott, Richard Nixon here featured with Prescott Bush, right? So all these connects end up super important when we get to Watergate and how this plays into Howard
Just
Hughes.
looking
And
at this picture real quick, that's
oh,
Jack
yep, let me
Ruby
go
with
back. Sorry.
Prescott Bush, and I've never seen this
Yep.
picture before. I had no idea. Is this real? I mean,
Yes. Yeah, this is vetted from, oh, I can get the book for you.
oh,
I think it's from Age of Secrets.
interesting.
Age of Secrets is Meyer's book, and Meyer was a close associate of Howard Hughes as well. So if it's not that one, I'll get you
Okay.
the
Yeah, fascinating.
validation. Yes, and so these are books that have been long forgotten, but easily accessible on the internet for
Well,
free on the archives. And so,
just so people maybe not familiar, but Jack Ruby was the person that killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So
yep.
just okay,
And
interesting.
and it become there are even more connects when we get into Permindex and other corporations that are involved with this. But we're going to stick on laying the groundwork for now because it gets really confusing. And so we'll stay here for just a moment longer. So this is the gaze, and that is really his name, and he was a Mormon. And oops, let me go back to that. All right. I think that other picture's in the wrong place. So Frank William Gay started as a chauffeur and an errand boy, and that's all he was. And he ended up being the senior executive of Summa Corporation by 1983. He controlled Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which was the sole stockholder of Hughes Aircraft. Okay, this is from the Washington Post, 7/17/83. So Hughes Aircraft makes sophisticated weapons, missiles, satellites, state-of-the-art electronics. So you weren't kidding with your Elon Musk comment, honestly. And all of the parts of weapons like Trident, Maverick, and Phoenix missiles. Okay. So this guy is just this errand boy, and then all of a sudden he's like the right-hand man to Howard Hughes on this whole Mormon mafia. He is Mormon.
Well, and just real
He
quick,
want
Heidi, you refer to it as the Mormon Mafia. Where did that term come from?
That is kind of a nickname of these players that we're going to
That
talk
that
about
was
and
the
are
nickname that was
talking
given
about.
to them as the Mormon
Yes.
Mafia, and that's and I know you'll probably speak to this, but why is it that Howard surrounded himself with so many Latter-day Saints?
Sure, sure. Well, he knew a couple things about Mormons, right? And obviously Howard has this drug issue. And so he knew Mormons didn't use drugs, drink alcohol, and another rule was don't touch the dice. He knew they wouldn't be gambling because it wasn't like okay with their
Mhm.
religion. And so he really liked that, and he did like that they were clean cut, but also you have to remember he's super paranoid. And each one of these people I'm talking about, almost everyone that he's surrounded by has either been in one type of three-letter agency or another, even the ones we didn't know. And
Okay.
so It's very strange, and also gay has connects to three-letter agencies. And it's just strange to me that these people are put, it's almost like a game where they're put in little pieces where they're supposed to be, right? And so this guy, like I said, he was just this chauffeur errand boy, but by the end of his life, he ends up running the Howard Hughes Medical Institute until he almost dies, clear until 2006, honestly. And so this is a super long time. He's a member of the board of directors of Harvard. He's an advisory of the National Council on the University of Utah, and he ran Summa Corporation until 1978. So this guy has a lot of connections that don't exactly make sense, right? Except we know he's also involved with three-letter agencies. So it opens up this little can of worms that, like, was Howard Hughes a made man, or was Howard Hughes just part of something that he didn't even realize? Right. I mean, we will never know, I guess. I mean, it's not been declassified anyways. But Gay's son and family becomes very important later, and we'll go over that. But keep him in your back pocket as we move on to E. Perry Thomas, who also was part of quote unquote Mormon Mafia. He helped make Howard Hughes very important and very accessible to money, basically. This guy's nickname was known as the Quiet Kingmaker. All right. He's the first banker to ever lend casinos money. This becomes super important because why? If you can't skim off the top, there's no business to run. So if you're a banker and you start lending money, then it's important to know, like, the mob's going to be basically ran out of town, and this turns into a corporatized Vegas, which it remains to this day. He did open the Bank of Las Vegas, and so that's really important to know. And these are archives of what he looked like. So just so people can understand. And there is some other connections here with him. And so, E. Perry Thomas was not really from an affluent family or anything. He changed the corporate rules for casinos and corporatized everything. But also, he has this history that a lot of people miss. Here's this banker that seems pretty much unrelated, other than the fact he's got a huge um, conflict of interest because he's literally the buyer for a lot of these casinos for Hughes, and he's backing it with the money. So that's not really too ethical in general, but whatever. But also, he was a three-letter agency guy too. He was a paratrooper in World War II. He was trained as a paratrooper skier, and they would drop him down, and he worked in an intelligence unit in Europe. So that came from the Las Vegas Review Journal. And this was publicized. And I'm like, okay, that's very strange. Perry's heroes, and this is from his son, were two bank brothers, Mariner and George Eccles. Well, Mariner is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board from 1936 to 1948 when E. Perry Thomas is put in position for these banking situations. And literally, the son said that Peter Thomas Parry, his son, says George Eccles was kind of my dad's godfather. Okay, this becomes super interesting. He also was one of the first people to tap into the Teamsters pension to back the bank. Well, we know that goes to some weird places. He said he wasn't involved with the Hoffa part, but we will never know. And it kind of seems strange to have this man having all these conflicts of interest, tapping into things that include mobsters and, building up Vegas in the meantime. He continued running things for a really long time. And actually, Steve Wynn was financed and a protege of E. Perry Thomas. He acquired the Golden Nugget through the help from E. Perry Thomas. And here is another picture of them together.
Hmm.
And also of Steve Wynn, his son said, he's like a son, or no, he actually said, he's like a son to me. He's a fifth son.
Hmm.
That is a direct quote about what E. Perry Thomas said of Wynn. So it gets curious because we've got these connections to some huge players. I mean, the Eccles in the Mormon
Yep.
church,
Yep.
So we just have to put that all in our back pocket and remember exactly what's going on when you're talking about facts. We're talking about facts of three-letter agencies mixed with the Mormon church, basic royalty-ish of the Mormon church. And then we've got bankers involved. Well, we also know that George A. Smith, he was a banker. We've got banking and Mormons involved since his time. And so we always have to look at things with the eyes of what are they doing here? Like, why is this just a personal thing? Is this just, we don't know. So, but interesting enough, like I said, he's definitely involved in things. So you mentioned his son, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, that
Yep.
came on. So we're going to talk about Bennett here, Senator Bob Bennett. He was LDS as well. He was 23 years in the Senate, and he is the grandson of Heber J. Grant. And so all of that is pretty important. And to understand also that he, from 1957 to 1969, was in the Utah National Army Guard, and he became president of the Mullen Company. Okay, so have you heard this before about the Mullen Company?
Mm-mm. I'm not
Okay,
familiar
this
with
is
it.
a great little, and this does come from Age of Secrets by Meyer, but this is also declassified. So you guys can look those up on his books and in the CIA FOIA doc, declassified. I should probably get pictures of that. But he did become president of the Robert Mullen Company. Well, the Robert Mullen Company is a CIA front, and he only had one employee, and that employee was E. Howard Hunt.
Okay.
When we get into that, who is E. Howard Hunt, right? He becomes the first chief of covert ops, and we know that he's extremely involved in the alphabets, right? In all the alphabet agencies. So it's kind of funny that all of these connects, right? We've got all of this connected. And so, oh, here, yeah. So there's some of that stuff that I was just saying so that people can actually see. And Bennett became PR relations director for Summa Corporation, just like we mentioned before. Who owned the Summa Corporation? Howard Hughes. And Bennett is actually the president from 1974 to 1978. And so he secretly worked under George Bush for the CIA as well. So this is interesting when we look at all these connects to these three-letter agencies and these like front PR agency shell companies. Well, this shell company, the Mullen Company, was especially created for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. This is going to go into Beverly Bruff Campbell, and I don't know if you know about her, but I did a whole episode on her and what she did. As far I can give a brief summation, and I need to add her to this, is she became extremely important for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, setting up very expensive $1,500 back then was a lot per person that would attend. And she would connect these people with really important people. So these important people would say, oh, I want to go see this Mormon Tabernacle Choir thing. And they would get these fancy dinners and chairs. And it was fancy. It wasn't normal. It wasn't a normal one. But who would be there? Saudi princes, three-letter agencies, like Khashoggi family, like all these things, and the prophet. And so they would all go, and then they could talk at these different things and not look suspicious. So she basically gave them a place to be. And that episode is called Sinister Secret Sister. And it's a very interesting, and it's a complete slideshow so that people can see the actual connects and FOIA docs and different things. So, like I said, Mullen Company was really not real. It was a shell company for the Central Intelligence Agency. So it becomes interesting when we look at all of these things and how it pours in with Summa Council to the Watergate Committee hearings. And so this is just another person that was on the Summa Council. Chester Davis, he becomes important as well. I didn't do a deep dive on him for this particular situation because Watergate's going to come up in my Permindex issue. So these are just pictures showing that all of this stuff is really important. Well, we get into Romney, and Romney really doesn't have a whole ton to do with this, other than the fact, remember, I said we were going to talk more about Gay's family later. Well, Gay's family, his son, becomes a managing director with Romney at Bain and Company. So his son here, he also was in the Quorum of the 70. And he became pretty important with micro lending. He did this until he was 70 in the quorum. And then they're kind of supposed to be like a made man in the quorum of the 70 after they're 70. Like if you make it that far, then you kind of get to stay until you die, and they take care of you. But that's not what happened with Robert Gay. So he actually got dismissed at the age of 70, which is super rare. That doesn't happen very often. And they kind of just screwed him over, for lack of a better term, and shoved him off because of the whole controversy at Bain and Company and these micro lending things that he was involved in. So they kind of shoved him off. And, Mitt Romney, he's Mormon royalty. He's involved in a whole bunch of things. But at this point, when he's leaving and they've got this scandal, they do something interesting and they can join the gay global capital with another really big name. They can join it here, HGGC LLC, which is Huntsman Gay. So it's the Huntsman Gay Global Capital. They continue to merge these giant Mormon based companies and put them together, still heading back to who? The Hughes Sumacore people, basically. So this continues throughout the lifetime of not only the people involved, but their children. So it goes down and down and down. And you might think, well, who's this guy? Right. Well, we've talked about Gay's son. This is now Gay's grandson.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yes, and Gay's grandson becomes also important, weirdly enough. And Gay's grandson is
Mhm.
Heather's husband,
Wow.
ex-husband. Heather Gay from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. She is a gay, and she is quoted as saying, "My husband is worth billions of dollars, and he's part of Mormon royalty from the Howard Hughes Corporation." So, kind of interesting where people are placed, right? Like, that's the last on the slides, but I can talk a few more things here. It's just very interesting that we have ties to Watergate. We have ties to, TV shows. We have ties to the Huntsmans. We have ties to the Eccles. We have ties to Wynn. We have all these ties, but also you have to remember RFK's assassination was pretty big deal with the Mormon Mafia, quote Mormon Mafia. They
Well,
they were
Heidi,
pinned.
real quick, why don't you exit out of the slide presentation
Oh,
now that we're
sure,
done,
sure.
and
Sorry.
we
Yes.
can talk. Okay, so you're talking about the assassination of was that RFK? What
Yeah, Bobby Kennedy.
and so Bobby Kennedy, of course, we know his son now, of course, is going to play a prominent role in the Trump administration. Why did that? Why was that such a big thing within the quote unquote Mormon mafia?
Well, so we'll get into explicitly the connections, but basically they say that one of the Mormon mafia led Bobby into the pantry where he was killed. And so that's the long and short of it. We'll go into who and how and why and how that connects, but it connects through a lot of things. And like I said, Permindex is going to come up. This is a corporation, another shell corporation. And when you look at the slides from who is on that board of directors, I can share that really quickly. It's really interesting to see exactly who is on this board of directors and how they became an integral part of things, right? Like how did this company, I guess it's really not, become a piece of the puzzle? And it goes clear up to Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn is on this whole board of the RFK, JFK type stuff. And it goes into a whole list of things that I was just like, whoa. So here is the initial board on 1958, according to EIR's examination of the incorporation papers in Switzerland, okay, for Permindex Industrial Exhibition. So it is Louis Montimer Bloomfield, the foreign prime minister of Hungary, Fernek Nagy, Giorgio Mantello, Roy Cohn, Joseph Bonanno, Jean de Menil, Paul Regadorsky, Count Gutierrez de Spadafora from the Mussolini bureaucracy, Hans Siegelman, he's a banker from Basel, Carlo de Emilio, attorney in Rome, Max Hageman, and Munir Shaborgi, Giuseppe Zagatti, an Italian fascist, for Fernek H. Simfrey of Hungary, and the last one is my favorite, Clay Shaw. So allegedly, Halliburton has been provided financing from Permindex,
Okay,
which
so just
Permindex,
if
yes.
anybody's watched the JFK movie years ago, Clay Shaw was played by what was the actor? Was it Tommy
Ah,
Lee Robinson? Is that his name?
I
Or
Tommy Lee. Oh man, I can't remember his last name, but I know the
yeah,
face.
Tommy Lee
Oh,
Jones, I think. Is it Tommy Lee?
Jones.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes.
So Clay Shaw is an infamous person in conspiracy theory stuff regarding the JFK assassination. So it is, yeah.
It is interesting.
Is
Yeah,
it like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy. I was telling you off camera, but I'm kind of like a connoisseur of conspiracy theories, as one of my friends likes to describe themselves. So I am fascinated, and there's no question that powerful people are connected. This is just the
absolutely.
reality and we can see how just even how it all plays out in our modern world. I mean, just think about how essentially Elon Musk is essentially kind of running this country and then what's so interesting is in the past it was all powerful people would do it from the background. He's literally,
Yes.
broadcasting it to the whole world and is actually trying to influence other countries now too. It's just a it's really
You're
interesting
not
to see what
wrong.
powerful
You're not
people,
wrong.
yeah, they can, very wealthy people, they can't just have, they got to have everything. And
Well,
in
and
one sense.
do you know about Elon Musk's money man? Do you know about his money man? This
No.
is fun.
No.
This is going to go on the Permindex, but I'm going to give it to you now because it's too much fun not. You brought up Elon, so I got to go there. Jared Birchall is actually Elon Musk's money guy, and Jared Birchall is a Mormon, and he's a big deal, and he doesn't fit for that position. He's much like the errand boy of the Hughes days. He didn't go to college for those type of things. And I find it interesting how they met. And actually, Elon Musk and Jared Birchall met at the Boring Company, Boring. And yes, they're digging tunnels. So I just find it fascinating that like all of these connections, and when we get to Zapata Oil and those connections there, it opens up a can of worms that I wasn't expecting because as much as I'm a conspiracy girl, I never really deep dive like the JFK thing because I was like, yeah, it was a setup. Like, who cares? Like, yeah, they probably did that. Like, I wasn't like I never had really gotten into it. I really hadn't. But when I started down this Howard Hughes thing, and then it leads to here, and then it leads to there, and we haven't even talked about that hotel. And the owners of that hotel is a whole rabbit hole of international ring, basically, of companies backing things that you
Is
wouldn't
that the Hotel
believe.
Xanadu that you were talking about?
Yes.
Here? Oh,
Yep.
okay. Huh.
Yep. And we're going to get into all of that and Permindex. And like I said, with Permindex, we've got Roy Cohn. And for those people that don't know who Roy Cohn is, I think Roy Cohn and Clay Shaw are the biggest two people on there that make you raise an eyebrow because what are two very prominent people, one an attorney and one Clay Shaw? I mean, goodness, like what is he doing on there with a bunch of fascists and basically mobsters? I mean, like
Yeah.
you can't, and bankers, like you can't explain that completely away. And Roy Cohn was Donald Trump's fix-it attorney and
Yeah.
connection to the mafia for many, many years.
Hmm.
But he has passed away now, so we can say what we want there and not be worried about being sued. I'm not saying the president of the United States has done anything nefarious. I mean, that's not my place, but I
Well, he
do
was
find
kind
it
of,
interesting.
I mean, Roy Conan is, he was involved with the Committee of Un-American Activities with Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, and then
Yep,
became a very prominent attorney in the state, in New York City in the 70s and 80s, very powerful person. And he really was in many ways a mentor to Donald Trump, kind of showing him the
absolutely.
ropes. And as a matter of fact, that Donald Trump movie that just came out kind of talks, I haven't seen the movie. I talked to one person who has and talks about the relationship that Roy Cohn
It's called Where's My Roy Cohn? It's fascinating and it will open your eyes on many things. If it's not that one, it watch that one as well.
okay,
So,
okay, yeah, yeah. There's another movie, but yeah, and that's actually a quote from Donald Trump. Where's my Roy Cohn? That's the kind of person
yes.
that he wants working
Yes.
for. And
Well,
I have to say, and Roy Cohn, by any standard, was a horrendous, horrible human being.
he he was a dirty dog. I
Yeah.
will say this. I think that the okay, this is my speculation. Okay. I think that the way that they push in the media and out in the world now for the gay agenda to be open, not necessarily to be gay, but to be open, right? Not be able, which is fine. But I think it leads back to Roy Cohn because of what he did to many people, including J. Edgar Hoover. So he was a dirty, dirty dog, and he got what he wanted, and he did not care who he hurt
Yeah.
in the process.
Yeah.
But there's some really curious pictures of him and old Donald Trump together at some birthdays and whatnot at Studio 54, and they look more than chummy. They look strangely familiar, and that's how I'm going to leave that.
Oh,
Not
well,
that I
well,
care.
yeah,
Yeah.
interest. Well, okay, very interesting. Well, this was
Yes.
a very unusual episode, and I'm fascinated by the because if you look at you can't write the history of the Western United States. Like I tell people, say, what makes you so interested in Mormonism? I said, well, the history of the West is the history of Mormonism. The people who
Yes.
just found the gold, started the gold rush in 1849, that was found by Latter-day Saints, that they played a major, very important role. And anything that happens in the Western United States, in many ways, the church is going to have um, be part of that because of just the vast amount of real estate that they own, the settlements
Yeah.
throughout the Western United States that wasn't just in Utah, but it was in many, many different states in the West. And so they play a major role. So the fact that they would be major players in places like Las Vegas and places, and other places is not that's
It's not so
not,
surprising.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not surprising at all that and so and I'm not like a super conspiracy kind of guy. I mean, I'm interested in them. I find the psychology of them is interesting, but I always do tell people, I say, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but let's not doubt that there are very powerful people in this world that have a lot of influence, and it's actually more obvious now than ever. And there's no question that big corporations essentially look what the sugar industry did
Mm.
with hijacking the food pyramid in the 60s. They knew that fat did not make you fat, but they said no, we know that. But they said sugar, they said eat more sugar, but they knew sugar made you fat. And so we basically have a whole generation of people that are suffering an obesity epidemic. And next thing you know, well, we got a cure for that from the big pharma who will give you these pills that will help you lose
Oh,
weight.
yeah.
And also, we have to ask ourselves, much of the food that we eat in this country isn't even food. Much of the stuff that we eat in this country is banned in Europe. So,
Yes.
to me, I don't think it even takes a conspiracy theorist to know that powerful interests have powerful connections and influence on how things are done in this country and throughout the world. And I do think that we can't just pretend that it doesn't. And
Right. And they have their, yeah.
conspiracy theories are helpful in the sense that it sometimes people can get way too into paranoia and stuff like that, and it can
Oh,
feed into your mental health issues. So we want to be aware of that. But I do think that conspiracy theories do play a role in kind of making sure that we're kind of saying like, hey, you should mistrust powerful people. You should mistrust people who want to have power. And I actually think that's a healthy position to have overall.
well, and we have to look at if you ever want to look at things and dissect anything, okay? And the Mormon Church I pick on because I used to be one, but the Catholics are no different. They're no different anywhere, okay? We're talking, like you said, about powerful people. But the top 10 holdings of the church, their stock holdings are interesting and they're public. Anybody can see them. But the biggest land owner in America, since you bring up food, do you know who it is right now?
Well, I will tell you the largest landowner in the state of Florida owns 3% of the state of Florida is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I know they've been buying up farms like crazy too. So are they currently the largest private farm owners now in the country?
So Bill Gates is the largest
Oh,
private, but I will tell you this. Number two is the LDS Church.
okay.
And curious enough, the number one stock holding for the LDS Church is Microsoft.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got a little round and round there. If you're taking all your money and you're putting a ton of it in Microsoft, which is owned by Bill Gates, right? Then you don't want that to fail. I mean, you definitely do not want that to fail. So the Mormon church being in number two position is curious, right? And then number two, I can't remember in what order, but it's like NVIDIA and UHS, which is, or not UHS, United Health, which is number seven. We've got all the alphabet, all these things are owned by the Mormons. I mean, a big chunk of them, these are their holdings. And I find it super interesting when we get into things, and I have another episode on the Reich and the Mormons because IBM plays into Bill Gates' story, whether people know that or not. And, IBM started with his mom. The connections there are not from his dad, though his dad had a huge part in Planned Parenthood. His mother worked for IBM and, in fact, was on the board of IBM. And she was critical in getting these cards, which are now CIA declassified, that the Mormons wanted so badly that had to do with how they classified the prisoners of the Reich. And so these cards are punch cards, and they made this machine to like categorize them. And even Howard Hughes is quoted as saying there was a separate corporation made by Gay to corporatize and computerize all of their genealogical information. And actually, the LDS Church went to the CIA and asked them for those IBM cards. So we've got a round and round circle for many, many, many years. We're talking when Billy Yates was a little boy. I got a picture with him and his mom, at the IBM thing. So, I mean, we're talking this has been familial for years. And we know that this happens, where they're not only friendly, not just Mormons. I'm talking powerful people, okay, billionaires. They're not just friendly with other billionaires. They intermarry, they keep relationships for long periods of time. They're involved in each other's families. Like this goes always, like this is on and on. And so it's interesting when we see those connections, and also when we see presidents of the church hobnobbing with presidents, of the United States of America, and also with members of the Reich. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, this episode will not be without controversy, but I think it's an interesting thing that you bring to the table. I do find the whole history of Howard Hughes and the connections to Mormonism and the mob and the development of Las Vegas. It's a fascinating story, and I actually I had a guess. I was talking to somebody last year right before I was having health problems that was supposed to come on my program to talk about these things. I think I reached out to him recently, but I haven't heard from him. But again, please reach out to me because I want to.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating story, and this person actually has done some scholarly work on this
Oh,
topic,
awesome.
and so I think it's important to kind of document all this stuff as well because it's part of the story. It's the part. It's
Yes.
part of the
It's
story,
just
and
history.
here,
Yeah.
at MBR, we're about talking about the full story. You
Yeah.
know, just recently, Peggy Fletcher Stack wrote that article about the purging going on at BYU. Well, I did that story a month ago because I was talking to
Mm.
the same people, some of the same people that she was talking to, other people that she wasn't talking to as well. And so people are asking, well, why are you doing this? I'm like, because it's part of the story.
Yes.
It's
Yes. So
part of the
important.
story
Yeah.
of the restoration. It's part of the story of the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and also other groups. And so, and you're a voice within the restoration. Like I said, you'll always be a Mormon no matter what. And that's your family is. You live in Utah. It's part of who you are. Your journey has taken you out of the church, but it's also really. It sounds like you're just a very fascinating person who's really interested in doing research into topics. And I want to commend you for your work. Now, maybe some people won't agree with your conclusions, but still, I think it's important that you've taken the time to do the research and do a lot of work in this, and I think there's a lot of merit to what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I try really hard to come at this from a historical aspect, and I don't come trying to point my finger and wag it at them for anything that happened. Like, can the church control that? Like, probably not. Like that's not. I mean, Brigham's church is not the church of today, and Joseph's church was not Brigham's church, to be honest. So we see these things change, and we see these powerful people take over, and money's always going to play a part, whether it's for the Pope or whether it's for the prophet. And that's just how it is. Yeah, it's not, but no matter what, don't blame the congregation, please. Like the people that go that just want to go to heaven, like they're certainly not to fault, and the church has to survive too. We have to look at what was happening and all that too. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I will say, just on a personal level, that my relationship with the church has been very positive. I've had a great conversation with Elder Anderson at the Tallahassee Temple a couple months ago. I had a 70 Ahmad Corbett give me a personal tour of the temple, and I just want to say I'm not, and of course, I'm not an enemy to the church. I'm somebody who's just an unbiased person who likes to have conversations with everyone and just put the information out there and let the people decide, hey, well, here's the facts. You decide what you think of it and don't go after the messenger. Just look at the facts where they're at. So, Heidi, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Yes.
Was there any final words that you wanted to say before we wrap this up?
Um, I would just like to quote one more thing. Age of Secrets is one of the main books I used, and also the other book, One Nation Under Blackmail, with Whitney Webb, who does amazing work, and she's going to come into even more play with this Permindex issues. So I just like to cite my sources. Other
Okay.
than that, the CIA FOIA
Do me a
docs.
favor and email me links to both those books, and I'll
Sure.
make sure to put them in the description. And also just this Permamex thing. Tell me what is this? You're referring to it. I just want maybe some clarification
Yeah.
what that.
So Permindex becomes basically it's a shell corporation. It is involved in assassinating people.
Oh,
And they really are fingering Permindex as basically the people that accomplished the assassination on JFK and RFK, as well as didn't accomplish it on the president of France and multiple other things. But I like to bring the actual pictures and show people stuff so I'm
okay.
not just talking talk, I guess.
All right. Well, I've always been fascinated by the JFK assassination, just even since as a young child. So I'm always interested in hear different views on that as well. In many ways, I'm a skeptic. So I've had Michael Shermer on, who's the editor of Skeptic magazine, and I kind of fall into the skeptic camp when it comes to conspiracy stuff. But it doesn't mean that we can't, the information. I always tell people, so conspiracy theorists bring a lot of information to the table. So even if you don't agree, like I said, with the conclusions, they still can find some valuable information that can be helpful. And so I don't
Yes.
think it should just be immediately dismissed either. And
Right, right.
so I think that's really important. So, well, Heidi, this was super cool to do today. We've been talking for a couple months now about doing this. We're going to have you back on to talk about Mark Hoffman.
Yes. Mark
And
Hoffman is fascinating to me. Another rabbit hole.
And I
Yes.
I just want to point out to the people back there, that's the book, The Salamander, which I think is about the best book about the Mormon uh,
Hmm.
murders, the Mormon forgery murders. I actually was showing you this earlier, and I'll just share this with the audience. But when I bought this book in Chicago, the co-author Linda Salotto was written was that I assume that was her autograph, and I went to Brent Ashworth and had him authenticate that this is her. And then, of course, I got Sandra Tanner signing this. My goal is to get everybody that's alive that was involved in the whole Mark Hoffman story to sign this book. So I imagine this would be worth something down
Oh,
the road.
yeah.
But that's
I
one of my
think
favorite books
so.
in my collection. This
Yeah.
is the first edition. And again, signed by she's passed away, Linda Silito. And it's interesting that I bought one with her autograph in it in Chicago of all
Cool.
places. So that's great. All
That's
right, folks.
wild.
Well, I love conversations about books and interesting. I'm always fascinated by history, and I think Howard Hughes is one of the most important people in the history of the United States. I find it very fascinating that his connection to Latter-day Saints. I also find it interesting that Elon Musk has a connection as well. Learned that today. Did not know that. Um,
Yes.
so, folks, I'd love to hear your comments, what you think about this, about Heidi's work and some of the stuff she put out there. I'm really fascinated to get your feedback, both pro and con. We don't mind getting pushback here at Mormon Book Reviews. That's part of what we do. And the most important, oh, and by the way, we'll have links in the description for everything we talked about. For those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we do have links there as well. But remember, this is the most important thing. All the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.